All right. So good morning. Thank you for being with us today here in Geneva and also online. A warm welcome to the Valuing Natural Capital Conference VNC2022, live from International Geneva, a city which we can call a global center for both environmental but also governance and finance. As you can see behind me, or next to me, this conference is a joint effort towards a solution for ecosystem protection and a new greener economy. It's a unique collaboration of the United Nations, key researchers from Harvard University's Department of Economics, the Footprint Coalition, and the think tank Geneva Macro Labs, supported by ServiceNow. Together, we rethink the relation between nature and finance. I am Marion Schirling, Head of Stakeholder Engagement at the Geneva Macro Labs and co-organizer of this conference alongside Geneva Macro Labs President Eckhard Ernst, Chief Macroeconomist at the International Labour Organization. So on behalf of the organizational team of the partners, we invite you today to join our mission of addressing climate change and biodiversity loss by exploring how to convert natural assets into natural capital by valuing the ecological and economic services they provide. So we believe nature is our most important resources in the fight against climate change. We also believe implementing solutions to finance its conservation and restoration should become our highest priority. So how are we aiming to achieve our conference mission? We prepared for a program with the most passionate and knowledgeable game changers in their respective fields around value natural capital. And we will have 2 keynote speeches, 4 panels, and 2 summary sessions. We will spend most of the time in the panels, as this is the space where we are co-shaping innovative finance and governance solutions together. And as we aim for maximum engagement, we will run 2 panels this morning and 2 in the afternoon that last 2 hours. That's quite unusual, but we believe if you want to have a workshop approach, if we want to get really deep into the subject, we need that time. So thank you already in advance for staying with us. I know a lot have registered online, and we are now looking forward to start discussing. So let me give you a brief overlook of how our journey today will look like before our panel discussion will start. We will start with opening remarks in the auditorium, and we have the honor to welcome Professor Lee White, Minister of Forests, Oceans, Environment and Climate Change from the government of Gabon, who has pre-recorded his opening remarks for our conference today. Then we will have Dr. Benedikt with us. He is the Vice President of the European Senate and Director of the EUTECH JAMBA, German Austrian Swiss Alliance. It's quite a long term. And they are our virtual partners. So they are basically hosting our virtual part of this conference online. And then I'm really delighted to present to you Dr. Frederico Bonaglia, Deputy Director of the OECD Development Center, who will finally share some reflection on the broader picture of how the natural capital paradigm for a just transition looks like. So let me give you a little bit of an additional background. We have over 300 people who registered for the conference, joining us from all over the world. I had the opportunity to look into the list, and we have people from Asia, from Africa, from Europe, and we're really happy that we can see that this topic is actually concerning all of us, and it's something that we have to work together across countries. So I would like to ask you that and encourage you that you use the virtual conference space to consult the agenda, to find useful documents and material for further reading. A lot of our speakers have submitted additional resources that we believe is valuable for you to look at. You can also access an area that's called networking. It's a space where you can access if you have registered. If you haven't done so far, we encourage you to do that throughout the day. We have also circulated an issue paper ahead of the conference, which should inform our today's discussion. Also, the issue paper you will find in the section where we have all the materials and resources uploaded. With today's conference, we are now moving from issues to solutions. I believe this is a nice move. Based on our discussions, we, the conference organizers and partners, we will write a solutions paper. And this solutions paper will basically showcase the pathway that we believe together can change how we value natural capital. I would like also at this point of the conference, in this opening section, express our sincere thanks to Edward Dixon, who is with us live in Geneva, who flew all the way to be with us. She's from ServiceNow, and we thank Edward and all your team for your investment and also your leadership in this effort. Thank you for being with us today. A final word about Chan Labs for those who don't know us yet. We are a think and do tank here in Geneva, and we believe that collective intelligence should drive sustainable development. With our community of leading experts, we are exploring how new technologies, innovative policies, and also pioneering business models can propel us toward an inclusive and sustainable future. So with that having said, I will now give the floor to our special guest, Professor Lee White.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Professor Lee White, Gabon's Minister of Water, Forests, the Seas, and the Environment. And I'm very sorry not to be with you today. I'd much rather be with you than sitting in a New York hotel room, but that is the way of the world right now. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Congo Basin and particularly about Gabon and how we are trying to be responsible stewards for the Congo Basin forests in our country. As we look at the climate change crisis, it's very clear that there is no solution to climate change without the Congo Basin forests standing. Congo Basin forests store almost 10 years of global emissions of carbon dioxide locked up in the trees and in the soils underneath the forests. In addition, the forests of Gabon and Congo send rainfall to the Sahel, the arid Sahel, and the rainforests of the eastern Congo Basin send rainfall into the Ethiopian highlands, thereby filling the Blue Nile and sending water all the way to Egypt, irrigating Egypt and stabilizing populations. So if we lose the Congo Basin, we both lose 10 years in the fight against climate change, and that takes us to a 3 or 4 degree world. And we lose the rainfall that sustains hundreds of millions of people around the African continent. And so we lose the stability of the African continent. We destabilize the African continent. Not only do our forests represent a bank of carbon, but the Congo Basin forests seem to be resisting climate change much better than the forests of the Amazon that seem to be really feeling now the the heat and the drought, and are at the point where they're going to start dying faster than they're growing, so becoming a carbon source. Fortunately for the world, the African rainforests have been subject to climate change in the past, and that seems to make them a lot more resilient to what's going on today. And so we're hopeful that the Congo Basin forest carbon sink, which is one of the most important carbon sinks in the world, is going to keep on working through to 2050 and beyond. So how do we give value to this natural capital? We could look at it from a negative viewpoint. What would the cost of hundreds of millions of African climate refugees being forced off the African continent and into Europe? I hate to use negative examples, but that's a very clear future scenario if we do not manage to deal with climate change. And as I've said, dealing with climate change requires us to maintain those rainforests in the Congo Basin, because this nature-based solution to climate change is the most efficient, cost-effective way of fighting climate change. We think we can deal with a quarter or a third of the climate change issue by working through natural capital. Now, Gabon is about to launch onto the international market a carbon credit launch. Over the last 10 years, we have reduced our carbon emissions by about 90 million tons through the REDD+ process. And because we're a net carbon positive country, we actually absorb net about 100 million tons of carbon dioxide every year. We're going to launch our REDD+ credits. And at the same time, we're looking forward beyond Glasgow to a world where net positive countries like Gabon, like Congo, like Bhutan, like Guyana and Suriname, like Papua New Guinea, will be able to be paid for the service of sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And we're convinced that if we can make it work for the few countries that are currently carbon positive, there are a lot of countries that can use nature-based solutions to flip from being carbon emitters to being net absorbers of carbon dioxide. And this can be a major nature-based solution for helping the world to reduce carbon levels in the atmosphere and fight against climate change. And the great thing is that as we do that, we also fight against the biodiversity crisis, biodiversity extinction crisis, where we know that about 1 million species are threatened with extinction today around the world, and these biodiverse forests are one of those critical places where we need to sustain biodiversity, because the biodiversity sustains us. Biodiversity is the source of medicine, of food, of DNA that we can use to develop a better world. So I hope that we can all come together and think about the mechanisms that we're going to put in place, the concrete mechanisms, the carbon credits for net positive countries, and then moving towards biodiversity credits or ecosystem service credits to make sure that nature is fighting climate change at our side. So I wish you well with your discussions, and I really look forward to keeping this discussion going, because I think it's one of the really critical issues that we have to deal with today, and it can be a very positive issue in our fight against environmental degradation. Thank you, everybody.
So we will now come to the next agenda point, which will be an opening remark by Mr. Benedikt who is from the EUTECH chamber. He will be joining us online as well.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, as Vice President of the European Senate of Economy and Technology, I would also like to welcome you to this event on behalf of the European Technology Chamber. And I've got the honor to say a few words to you at the beginning. And also, like Marianne said at the beginning, we are hosting this event with our tech forum. So many greetings from Brussels. And before I begin, let me express my congratulations for over 300 participants. I think this is already a success. So by whole respect for that. Ladies and gentlemen, today is all about valuing natural capital. I admit that the term natural capital may not be familiar to everyone in our world, but I think that everyone should know this term at some point. If you Google natural capital, you will find the following definition. I will read it out. Natural capital is a metaphor for minerals, plants, and animals of the biosphere insofar as they are considered a factor of production, for the production of oxygen, a filter of water, a preventer of erosion, a carrier of genetic material or other natural services, and this is important. In this context, there is an attempt to capture the economic value of the ecosystem that goes beyond the traditional understanding of it as a passive natural resource. Now, this is probably not so easy to understand, but the passage that leads beyond the traditional understanding as a passive natural resource, this is crucial for me personally, because it is at its core exactly what we'll be discussing today. What is natural capital? What can be done to preserve natural capital? And how can it be, let's say, made measurable and thus exploitable? And at least how can it be financed? And the answer to the last question will probably decide how the topic will be discussed in the future. The European Senate of Economy and Technology and the EUTECH Chamber have the common motto, technology obliges. And with our current 16 commissions, which we are calling alliances, we want to contribute precisely to the positive answering of such questions and provide good content for this purpose. And I'm of the opinion that there are also incredibly good technologies, especially in Europe, but we still make far too little business out of them to really change the world. But the good news is that we can influence this ourselves. But let's not have any illusions. Here, two very clear rule applies. Nothing becomes a business that doesn't make money. And unfortunately, just through philanthropy, we will not get to the necessary point if we are all honest with each other. And that's why it's so good that the GEM Labs is dedicating itself to this topic. Possibly this is a good kickoff, a kind of kickoff to raise awareness of this so important future topic. Environmental technologies need to find solutions for the private sector so that many big investors are giving them money. And there's certainly potential for conflict, for sure, between profit and environmental protection. But I believe there's now such good technologies that are profitable and yet strongly focused on environmental protection. And besides, on the part of politics, we need a legal framework, of course, that ensure this. Our organization is working on exactly those things. So we produce white papers for the industry, for example, which in turn are used to produce position papers that we are discussing directly with decision makers in politics and industry. And the next time, by the way, we will have our delegation trip to Prague in November on the occasion of the Czech EU presidency. So let us therefore forge further alliances. Marianne, you have said this wonderful sentence at the beginning, from issues to solutions. So ladies and gentlemen, I hereby invite the GEM Labs and each of you personally to join this discussion. Let's make the world a better place. I wish you a successful time here in our tech forum and of course on the spot in Geneva, and I'm sure that you will leave the event later with so many impulses. So thank you very much for your attention and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Benedikt, for being with us today. Thank you for your words. We will now move to our first keynote speech, and it will be Dr. Federico Bonaglia from the OECD Development Center. Let me share a couple of words about Federico, and then I will give over the mic to him. So Federico supervises the center's activities with Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, as well as the center's perspectives on global development and its work on rural and territorial development, migration, and natural resource-based development. And he also manages the center's governing board, where representatives from 57 member countries and the European Union provide strategic guidance and oversight. And they also engage in policy dialogue on a wide range of development policies. In addition, Federico represents the OECD in the G20 Development Working Group and supports the OECD Sherpa Office in coordinating the OECD contribution to the G20 and G7 in the area of development. We are really happy that, Federico, that you are with us today. We truly enjoyed the prep call with you, and we can't wait to understand what your reflection will bring to the table in terms of how the natural capital paradigm for a just transition looks like. Over to you.
Thank you, Marianne. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to join this important discussion and to bring our modest contribution to this audience of experts that will be discussing very important topics over the course of this conference. Let me start by saying that here at the OECD Development Center and at the OECD more broadly, we place a lot of importance on the question of just green transitions and to ensuring that the fight against climate change goes hand in hand and advances sustainable development everywhere. This is particularly challenging when you consider the context of developing countries, the area where we at the Development Center specialize on. Developing countries that bear very little responsibility for emissions, but at the same time already suffer very significantly from the negative impacts of climate change. At the same time, they face large development challenges that have been amplified by the recent crisis. But at the same time, they also hold the greatest natural resources and biodiversity. So for this reason, I think that the objectives of the conference that you are organizing are particularly important and timely. First, we clearly need to develop a new development paradigm, a development paradigm that recognizes what matters for development, the well-being of people, and that the well-being of people is closely related to the well-being of the planet. So we really need to develop a new development paradigm that fully recognizes the essential role of natural capital and the services that nature delivers to all of us. Second, if this development paradigm is to be implemented, we need new effective governance mechanisms that on one hand allow us to protect the ecosystems and the underlying natural assets, and on the other hand allow local communities and people to be fully involved in the decision making and in the investment that are necessary to preserve and protect and value nature. And thirdly, so if we need a new development paradigm that fully incorporates nature, if we need effective governance mechanisms to preserve nature and to involve local communities, we also need financing. And this is if you want, a double consideration here. On one hand, we need financing to preserve biodiversity, but on the other hand, we can better leverage nature and biodiversity to raise finance and respond to those important adaptation and development needs that I was mentioned before. So in my remarks today, if you allow me, I will touch briefly about three main points in order to set the stage for your expert discussion. First, I would like to recall to all of us why it is so important to value natural capital and why this is particularly important for developing countries. Second, I will briefly recall what has been the OECD thinking and approach about this issue. And thirdly, I will leave you with some consideration for further reflection and research. So let me start by recalling why natural capital is so important. We heard already from the previous speakers that human prosperity and well-being are inextricably linked to the well-being of the planet. And these links becomes even more evident if we look at the rising vulnerabilities that climate change is bringing about. Just to quote one number, the World Bank estimates that if we do not effectively address climate change, more than 130 million people will fall into poverty, in addition to the worrying numbers that we already have. So we need to protect the natural environment because this is essential in our fight of climate change. But at the same time, if we continue to stretch the boundaries of our planet and its assets, the long-term impacts on our prosperity and that of future generations are going to be put into question. So protecting the natural capital is good for our prosperity. And I think that this is a very important point that we need to keep in mind. And we need to better reflect in our reflection the fact that the natural environment provides us goods and services that are indeed essential for our well-being and our economic development. We increasingly see that human activity is substantially degrading the global stock of natural capital. And if we look at conventional indicators of wealth and economic development like GDP, this phenomenon is unfortunately not properly reflected. We are not properly looking at the consequences of not valuing natural assets properly in terms of forest, mangroves, water, fish, or clean air. So there are, in my view, at least two reasons why we are failing in this respect. First is that we have been taking for granted for too long the significant economic values of many environmental goods and services. And second, while there is an increasing recognition of the importance of natural capital, we still have a poor understanding of what natural capital is. And I would like to rejoin what the Minister of Gabon said, that you can present this in terms of negative terms or positive terms, but I think that we still need to have a better understanding of the fact that preserving natural capital is essential for poverty eradication, is essential for supporting livelihoods, and is essential for advancing intergenerational equity. So if we all agree that natural capital is so important, but we also agree that it is poorly understood, the services the natural capital provides are poorly understood, we should bring this into the context of developing countries, because developing countries contain most the world biodiversity. They depend more on ecosystem services for economic development than developed countries do. And with rising ecosystem losses and climate stress, the development gains that we have been observing over the last couple of decades are increasingly coming under stress. In countries where, for example, countries of sub-Saharan Africa, there are estimates that shows that up to 10% of the GDP could be lost by 2030 if vital ecosystem services not properly protected and collapse. So what all of these tell us, and I will move now to the second point. Natural capital is important, natural capital is fully understood, and the situation, unfortunately, is particularly challenging for developing countries where natural capital plays such an important role for their economic development and where the stresses from climate change, despite limited responsibility, are very high. So what has the OECD tried to do to raise awareness and push policymakers to better take into account these important issues? Well, the OECD has done two things, many things, but let me quote two. First of all, we have tried to walk the talk in terms of measuring what we treasure. Measure what you treasure means that you need to make an effort to have a more granular understanding of the different dimensions of well-being. And for this reason, the OECD has developed a well-being framework that includes all sorts of capital, including natural capital. And we have worked with our member countries to convince them that the objective of development policies should not be maximization of GDP growth per se, but it should be maximization of well-being by also looking at the distributional consequences in terms of different well-being dimensions. And a very important point of well-being framework is natural capital. So the first thing is that we need to measure what we treasure rather than treasuring what we can measure. Second, the OECD has engaged not only with member countries in the OECD, but also with global governance fora like the G7 to provide some policy recommendations and suggestions about what the international community could and should do to advance on this important file. And there are in particular 4 messages that the OECD has developed for the G7 last year that I think are particularly important for the discussion we are having here today. First is that, as I was just saying, you need to measure. You need to measure better. And it's important that we measure and mainstream biodiversity and natural capital in policy design, but also in business models. So it's not only an issue for the public sector, it's also an issue for the private sector. Second, we need to better align budget and fiscal policies with biodiversity. Third, and this is very fitting for the discussion we are having, it's fundamental that biodiversity and natural capital are better embedded into the financial sector. And fourth, it's crucial to improve the biodiversity outcomes from international trade and international investment. So let me very briefly go into each one of these 4 messages before concluding with some suggestions for future research and analysis. So on the first point, mainstreaming, measuring and mainstreaming biodiversity. What we observe is that there has certainly been improvements in terms of biodiversity, but that, for example, there are today almost 90 countries that have implemented accounts that are consistent, national accounts, that are consistent with the UN system of environmental economic accounting. But at the same time, the majority of accounts are incomplete, and we only have 34 countries that have fully developed ecosystem accounts. And even in this case, when you look at the data, natural capital is not given equal weight to economic data. So what we recommend is that we should better measure and better mainstream biodiversity into all relevant strategies, national risk assessment, but also international cooperation strategies. The second point, in order to do that, of course, you have a full suite of tools that should be used, from regulatory tools like pollution standards to economic tools like, for example, taxes or biodiversity offsets, to information provided to citizens and consumers, for example, eco-labeling. And these tools should be used to fully internalize the external costs and benefits coming from natural services, natural capital services for households and firms. So that's the first point. The second point is that we need to better align budgetary and fiscal policy more generally with biodiversity. And this is, if you want, a very sad realization that we come across. You may know that OECD measures, for example, tax revenues, and we compute for a large number of countries the amount of taxes that are actually collected, and then we classify them. And out of this amount of taxes for all OECD countries, we know that only 5% of tax revenue comes from environmentally related taxes, which is little. But if you look into the environmentally related taxes, you realize that less than 1% of that amount of taxes is related to biodiversity relevant taxes. So what we are observing is that on one hand, governments are not collecting enough. And on the other hand, they are continuing to provide harmful support to activities that are encouraging the unsustainable use of natural capital, unsustainable production and consumption. So it's fundamental that we reflect this into policies. Let me quickly go over the other 2 messages. The third one being the importance of better embedding biodiversity in the financial sector. And here, you probably have around the table here in the room a group of pioneers that have already realized the importance of reflecting biodiversity in risk strategies and in financial engineering. But unfortunately, this is not the majority of people acting in the financial sector. So it's clear that we need to change the business model in the financial sector. We also need to use financial engineering and innovation to be able to develop instruments that would allow countries like Gabon and others to leverage the services coming from the natural capital to get resources, not only for protection of the environment, but also for investing into their sustainable development. Last but not least, we clearly need to reflect about the role of international trade and international investment and the role of global value chains. We know that international trade can lead to both positive and negative impacts for biodiversity. It can lead to positive impacts because if international trade leads to more efficient ways of production, we reduce the amount of natural resources needed for production. But international trade can also have negative impacts. For example, if we have production shifts that exacerbate land use or that increase pollution, or that introduce alien species in countries. So what we are suggesting is that there should be not only effort at tackling illegal wildlife by closing legal loopholes, addressing corruption and improving the prosecution of environmental crimes, but we also suggest that we should improve the traceability and sustainability of supply chain, including by leveraging responsible business conduct standards and instruments. And here, the OECD has developed important guidance that should be better implemented. So I provided you, and I will now conclude, a brief overview of the 4 major recommendations that the OECD has developed for the relevant subject that we are discussing. Let me conclude by leaving with some food for thought in terms of what we need to do more if we want to advance this agenda. And I think that there are at least 4 things that we should consider if we want to optimize our efforts to develop strategies, frameworks, and standards for natural capital accounting. First, it's political commitment. We need stronger political commitment to change normative and programmatic frameworks for valuing natural capital. Second, we need to develop better standards for accounting. We need technical criteria, methods, processes intended to harmonize the practice of natural capital accounting. Third, we also need partnerships and capacity building. This is something that happens at the national level, in local communities, and in some cases, there are capacity gaps that need to be addressed. Fourth, we need research. And here, I think that we need more knowledge to understand what knowledge gaps exist and how they should be addressed. So I hope that I was not too long, but it's been a real pleasure to address this distinguished audience. And I hope that we will have an opportunity to continue this conversation and advance this important battle.
Thank you so much. That was great. And I believe that we will follow up on the 4 recommendations that you just mentioned at the end of your keynote. Thank you for your time. And we are looking forward to be discussing with you the next steps, as we all agreed as the partners of this conference that we would like to use the conference as a starting point to dive deeper into value natural capital from a multi-stakeholder approach.
So thanks again. Great to have you all back in the room. Great to see that after the exciting discussion this morning, we have still some appetite for more. That's good to know, because now we have our second keynote coming up. Dr. Ralph Chami, who is, and I kind of switch a bit from the notes that he gave me to introduce him, who is a long-standing friend. And we go back 10 years now, and I've been discussing all different sorts of things. And 3 years ago, he came with this idea about developing a new valuation framework. And I said, that sounds interesting, but how can we actually implement this? So we started talking about this, discussing, we're reaching out to different partners. And now here we are 3 years later, and we actually have something more concrete on the table. He has something more concrete on the table, so he will present it to you. But before I give him the floor, I want to briefly correctly introduce him. So Ralph Chami is Assistant Director at the IMF, currently on sabbatical and working on tackling the two risks to humanity: climate change and biodiversity loss. He has developed a model, and that's exactly what we are talking this afternoon. He has developed a model for valuing natural capital, including blue and green nature, what we talked again this morning, flora and fauna, and a framework for developing the natural capital markets for ecosystem services. Expert, Ralph, he is on fragile and low and middle income states. He's a co-founder of Blue Green World and Rebalance Earth, and on the advisory board of the Geneva Micro Lab, so thanks for that. Euro-Mediterranean Economist Association and the EU Mediterranean and African Network for Economic Studies, EMANES, formerly EMNES, as well as Senior Finance Advisor at Finance for Biodiversity Initiative, F4B. So Ralph, thank you very much for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Eckhart. Thank you, GemLabs. Thank you all. It's nice to be with people working in the same area and from different parts, and on something that is really, really topic of the day. So what I want to do is I want to construct for you how we can build an economy for tomorrow, of tomorrow, and for tomorrow. And not just describe it, but actually be more courageous and describe the steps that we can actually take together to achieve that economy. So I say towards an equitable and nature positive. So I'm quite ambitious that I think we can work towards not only a nature positive economy, but a nature positive economy that has to be equitable also. Okay. So anyway, I was at COP25 talking about the evaluation for the carbon services of the whale. And I remember being a lone voice among many voices that only wanted to talk about climate change. That is, nature was not present at COP25. Then I went to Marseille, the IUCN meeting in Marseille, and all the nature people were there, but the climate people were not there. Finally, I showed up in COP26, and it had dawned on both camps that we're talking about the same thing. Climate and nature are interlinked. Duh. But this is what happens when humans get involved with anything. They like to categorize things, silo things, and assume that nature is like that, whereas nature is one living system. Does not recognize water, does not recognize land, does not recognize flora or fauna. Nature is a living system. We humans tend to categorize things. May I start now? Teacher, can I? Okay. All right. I'm scared of Marianne. Okay. Okay. All right. So what humanity has realized is that we're facing not only one risk. Everybody's enamored with the climate risk, but Sir David Attenborough and others have been talking about the danger to nature itself and the loss of biodiversity. And so we're not facing just basically the climate risk and climate calamity, but the fact that we may lose nature. And the two are interlinked, and they're interlinked through human activity. So if I were to tell you what should we do and stop here, it'll be change our behavior, we change our reality. I used to be a physicist a long time ago, and we learned that perception is your reality. So why is this important? Because the current system that we find ourselves in is this one, that somehow, somewhere, probably by the Cartesian paradigm, the Monsieur Descartes, that gave supremacy to the mind over the body, and therefore divorced humans from nature. And from that, we got the juggernaut of the Industrial Revolution, which delivered growth, but not development, and growth at the expense of nature. Suddenly we got into this, because pre-Descartes, humans and nature were intertwined. That's why we talk about indigenous people and our ancestors, because they viewed themselves as part of nature. where somehow around the time of Descartes, we developed this amnesia. And it was very costly because once you see that the economy is outside of nature, somehow the E ended up on the second line. Okay, whatever. Okay, then if you think that this is the reality, then you start to think of very strange thoughts. That somehow the economy can grow. See the circle of economy? Outside of nature, we can grow it with unboundedly. You can increase the circle and not worry about the other circle, which is nature. So nature could shrink, could expand. After all, I'm a trained theoretician. We called nature an externality, right? And so therefore, our relationship with nature was quite strange. And we started to think we can extract with impunity, we can pollute with impunity and get away with it. And what we're finding out is we didn't get away with anything. It's come back full. So what happens is you end up with unsustainable growth. We end up causing the impact on nature, and it boomerangs back in terms of climate change, and then they start to feed off of each other. Anyway, so how do we fix this problem? Well, sometimes, when you're faced with calamity, the solution is in it. So we have two risks. And the two risks are materializing in real time. If any one of them were to materialize fully, we're done for. I mean, if we grab all the carbon in the world and you lose nature, humanity is done for. So we can't afford to focus just on climate without focusing on nature. And suddenly you realize, oh, but nature can also help me in the fight against climate change. Why? That's what Natalie today showed us. IPCC report tells you that nature can help us by at least 38% in the fight against climate change. So there goes your plan. You have a plan of action. If I invest in nature, reduce the risk to nature, by protecting it, restoring it, rejuvenating it, then nature can reward me by reducing the climate risk by a sizable percentage. So we already have a plan of action. Question is, how do we affect it? How are we going to do this? Well, I use the word invest. So is nature investable? Right? I'm not talking about philanthropic giving here. I'm talking about, is nature a proposition that has dollars and cents on it, above and beyond philanthropy and altruism and nature for itself? But let's see. Is nature, so in terms of carbon, I'm just going to focus on carbon, but I could easily be talking about biodiversity and all stuff, because there's a market for carbon, and I checked it before I came here. If you go on the European ETS, it's over $100. So over $100 per ton. So there's already a market for carbon. Let's not discuss how that 100 comes about, can do it later, but there's already a market. So then the question is, can I link nature to the carbon market? Well, it turns out, this is also an IPCC report. Very few people read it, as I discovered. It basically says that the open ocean, that is the part of the ocean belongs to nobody. That's the orphan. That's actually the one belongs to everybody. Has been grabbing carbon since 1870, since we started collecting data. About 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide is sequestered below 1,000 meters. And anything, you ask any marine scientist, will tell you anything below 1,000 meters is pretty much there forever, unless you disturb it with excavating or mining or dredging. Then you push up the carbon back into the atmosphere. So there's value there. We can actually put the dollar amount to this. What else nature gives us? Hey, blue carbon, closer to shore, we have, as Martin just showed us, so mangrove, seagrass, salt marsh, kelp forests, wetlands, and so forth, they're huge carbon sinks. Huge carbon sinks, but not only in terms of carbon sinks. Now I'm just repeating what Martin said. They're also great defense against flooding. And when you have these bodies are healthy, you find that the stocks of fish are actually quite healthy with them. In fact, if you want to sort of check on my words, you can go to the website of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and the scientists actually have the data there showing you the link between seagrass and fish stocks. All right, what else? Oh, phytoplankton. Well, the phytoplankton are these microscopic organisms that float in the ocean. probably you've heard the story by now. They do something incredible. They grab carbon dioxide and they emit oxygen. How much carbon dioxide? Let's say it's between 20 and 30% of CO2 that is emitted. So this is on flow basis. For people to kind of visualize what I'm talking about, that's about 4 times the Amazon forest per year. Per year. This is not a stock, this is a flow. What else? This is work started with Andy Pershing, 2010 paper, and then many other papers after that, basically showing that the great whales, the 9 species of the great whales, they accumulate quite a bit of carbon on their body. I mean, after all, we're all carbon units, but they really have quite a bit. On average, 9 tons of carbon on an average whale, great whale. Multiply that by 11/3, that gives you 33 tons of carbon dioxide being kept out of the atmosphere. Now, the thing with the great whales, if when they die, they're negatively buoyant, so they sink to the bottom of the ocean. And when they sink, that carbon never interacts, it never goes back up, so it's sequestered. But they also like to eat krill, and krill likes to eat phyto. And the phyto needs phosphorus, nitrogen, and iron to survive. And you can say, well, we can find these from the runoff from rivers and movement of wind over land. That is all true, all true. But in the Southern Ocean, where are the rivers? And in the Southern Ocean, where's the wind over land? It's in the poop of the whale. That's where they find all these nutrients. So there's an incredible virtuous cycle. The great whales feed on the krill. The krill likes to eat zooplankton, phytoplankton, and those guys, in order to survive, they need the nutrient. And the limiting factor typically is iron. And that is found in the poop of the great whales. Imagine. So those guys are very smart. They poop at the surface, they fertilize the phyto, more krill, more food. For our purposes, you had lunch, so I could talk about poop. But for our purposes, we're interested in the carbon side. When these whales are fertilizing the phyto becomes very active, grabs even more carbon dioxide. So if you were to do the experiment of how much carbon does one whale contribute to sequestration through its body, directly or indirectly through its fertilization of phytoplankton, you could come out with an estimate that one whale is equivalent to thousands of trees. Hey, not only forests, because everybody tells me about forests. Yeah, but this is work of Fabio Berzaghi, Nature Journal, 2020. Basically, he and his colleagues discovered that the forest elephants, these are not the savanna elephants. These are the forest elephants that Walid was talking about. These, through the way they walk, through the way they eat, they have proclivity for low carbon plants, and, through the way they poop. All about poop. And anyway, they increase carbon sequestration in the trees between 7 and 14%, depending on the concentration of elephant per square kilometer. The optimal concentration, really density, is between 0.5 and 1 elephant per square kilometer. It's all in Fabio's paper. So what this is really telling you, it's not really about flora only, it's about fauna. And it's not really about fauna, it's fauna and flora interacting with each other. That is the fabric of life. This is the richness. That's why we need a systems approach rather than focusing on a tree or focusing on an elephant or a whale or so forth. So what I've decided to do is with Fabio said in his Italian accent, "Hey, Ralph, can you value my elephants?" I said, we can value the carbon sequestration service of it. I would never value a living being. Let's just agree it's priceless. Life is priceless. But the elephant is providing a service, just like I presumably provide a service to the IMF and they pay me a salary. So if they can measure my service, they pay me a salary. Can we measure the carbon sequestration of an elephant? And the answer is yes. So how much would you pay them? How much would you pay an elephant that lives 60 years and gives birth to babies, and some of them survive, some of them don't survive. Those that survive give birth, and you track the overlapping generations over their lifetime, and you discount to the present. Basically it, more or less, you end up with a minimum of $2.6 million. That's how much you'd have to pay her for her lifetime, as a present value discounted expected discounted net present value, not the present value, for services. What else can we do? Look at this one. This is work with Carlos Duarte, who's the father of blue carbon. And look at how much is the value of carbon sequestration by seagrass globally. I can only tell you that this number is a minimum. So I'm reporting the minimum, the lower bound, not the upper bound, just in carbon sequestration alone. If you were to add to it the flood control, the fact that when you have seagrass, you're staving off flooding, you would add another trillion. And if you look at the impact of seagrass on fish stocks and on coral reefs, the numbers would grow quite a bit more. Hey, the whales. We can also look at the whales. You can look at the whale living over her lifetime. Again, similar, you develop the population growth model for the whales, and then you add the finance model on top of that, and you look at the lifetime earnings. What would be the salary that you'd have to give her for her carbon services to humanity? It'll be a minimum of $3 million. This was, we did the original paper when the price of carbon was $24. And we did this when the price was 60, and today the price is 100. So you can imagine that 3 million is an old number. This carbon. Whales do a lot more than that. What else? Okay, this one. So let's go back to the deep ocean. The deep ocean has a stock of 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide. You can multiply it by $60, and you get at least $30 trillion. That's the value of the stock. But if you look in the IPCC report, they have the equation for the stock. You can differentiate it, and you get the flow equation per year, and then you can figure out how much carbon the ocean, the open ocean, is sinking in. And I can guarantee you that the present value of the flow over 100 years would add another $30 trillion. So nature is valuable. Intrinsically, nature is valuable in terms of services to humanity. And for some aspects of nature, we can actually measure that service. So biodiversity is very valuable. It's invaluable intrinsically, again, first and foremost. But on top of that, it's valuable in terms of the services that it provides to us. And it's, again, it's not about flora, it's not about fauna, it's not about blue or green, it's about all of this. The system itself is incredibly valuable. So, in a sense, people jumped ahead and said, well, we have a natural capital. Wow, this is amazing. Now, in the language of pure market, for those of you coming from the markets, this is not natural capital. This is natural asset. That's the mistake that many people, that classical economists like me would make. But I came from the finance ranks, so I know the difference between capital and finance and asset. For an asset to become capital, you have to codify it in the law. Once you codify it in the law, you endow it with 4 characteristics: priority, convertibility, universality, and transferability. One is over time, your claim over time. One is over space. One is who has the first claim. And one says that if you and I end up in court, and I win, I have a claim on the legal tender of the country where this conversation is taking place. That's when natural asset becomes a natural capital. Now, why is that point important? Because despite the fact that nature is valuable intrinsically and in terms of services, nature is not doing well at all. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. So what is missing from this conversation? What is the third pillar for this work, for really to have markets around nature and not to do this one-off, going around putting your hand out and begging Microsoft to give you money, or some rich billionaire to feel good and give you money around Christmas time or Easter, or what have you? What would it take for strange people to come to you and say, take my money, I want to invest in nature? The legal framework. This is the third pillar. This is what's missing. How do we frame our relationship with nature? Who can speak on behalf of nature? I have been approached many times since I started this work, with people saying, can you help us out? And I said, can you speak for the forest? No. I can't make a market in it, in its services. By the way, we are talking about services of nature here, not nature itself, okay? of a living and thriving nature. So we need to understand what is our legal relationship with nature. Does nature have rights? Should we confer personhood on nature? Should we criminalize acts that hurt nature? Or is nature just an asset or an input in an output production, output that only serves humanity? This is a very, and by the way, a lot of people are working on this right now, a lot of groups and researchers and trying to understand what ought to be, because this will define what kind of market are we going to have. Okay? In the meantime, what should we do about the ocean? Well, the ocean, if anything, it's a living system. We need to approach it as a living system. It has its own rights. All these values of nature that I talked about is about a living and thriving nature. It's about a relationship change from an extractive view of nature to a regenerative view of nature. That's what's new about this. All right, so here's some examples about some countries that have already gone ahead and defined their relationship with nature. I'm told I have 5 minutes. Did you include the extra minutes? Okay. All right, just want to make sure I have my rights. I know my rights. Okay, so Chile, well, this was voted down, but still, when I looked at the draft, I was really impressed with Article 8 because it said that lives of humans, individuals and citizens, and nature are all intertwined. Okay? New Zealand conferred personhood on rivers. Can you imagine? A river has the same rights as you and me, and we have responsibilities towards a river as we have legal responsibilities towards each other. In Costa Rica, they conferred personhood on bees because they realized the pollination role that bees play. So, and a lot of other countries are considering what ought to be the relationship with nature. All right, so once you have, now somebody says, okay, Ralph, cut to the chase. How do we develop a market for nature? Here it is. Okay, so if you want to develop a market for nature, what is it that you must do? Well, on the left-hand side, somebody is going to supply the ecosystem services of nature. Let's stick to carbon right now, but we can entertain other types of services. So what should the community do if the community owns the natural asset, or the indigenous people, or the government, if they can speak on behalf of it legally? First thing you want to do is you want to do a scientific accounting. First thing is, what is it that we have and how much of it do we have? That's next thing you want to do on the left-hand side. You need to do financial valuation, market valuation in particular. You want to speak the language of markets. No shadow pricing, please, because traders won't believe you. It's got to be a market price that you're talking about here. Okay. Next is the legal relationship. Can you write a contract on behalf of that piece of land or seagrass or marshland or whatever it is you're selling its services? And of course, once you do all of that, then the other side, the demand side, all those companies, all that world that had made commitments to carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral, suddenly are going to say, hey, I need to go carbon zero. By the way, just segue, emissions alone won't do it, huh? If you cut all emissions today, all emissions, if all smokestacks in the world today stop, we're still going to die from the carbon that is already in the atmosphere. And that is, by the way, a huge confusion I find it among people and policymakers. They confuse stock and flow. Emission is about flow. But the atmosphere itself is full. It's like a tub that is full of carbon dioxide. How are you going to drain it? With what technology are you going to drain it? Nature. Those communities and countries that are sitting on nature can sell the carbon sequestration services of their nature to a world that needs to go net zero, not zero, net zero. That means emission minus take out the offsetting side. So they'll be willing now that once you define the legal relationship with nature, the natural asset becomes a natural capital, becomes a financial capital, it gets on your balance sheet, and you're off to the races. But there's a big but here. The principles for this market ought to be these two things, that the money has to come back to look after nature itself in perpetuity. because only a living and thriving nature can give you those benefits. And I'll show you how we do that, if Marianne would allow me. Okay? And the second thing is the money has to come back to look after the stewards of nature whose lives are intertwined with nature, and these are the local and the indigenous population. So these are the principles for developing this market. So the first thing happened when we were developing this, people started telling me, what about equity, Ralph? Equity, I said, equity towards whom? They said, towards people. I said, what about nature? Shouldn't we confer equity on nature too? So we need equity towards nature, equity towards local population, and we intragenerationally and intergenerationally. One way to do so is to create what we call a nature wealth fund, akin to a sovereign wealth fund. So the balance of the money goes into a fund. That balance enters the balance sheet of the government. That will change the government's net worth. It will change its ratings. It will change the debt dynamics. It will change its fiscal stance. But the flow from that is well governed through all these rules that says the money will go to look after the elephants, as Walid would like it to see. The money will go to look after the seagrass, as Martin wants to see. Okay, you have to specify that in the rules of the trust fund. There's an issue also of governance. This is from Walid's, from Rebalance's deck of PowerPoints. This is about governance of the market. How do you ensure transparency and verification? Well, you can use blockchain. Because remember what you're trying to do here. You're trying to get people with money to give you your money, and you have a problem of, for those of you in the theory, principal agent problem. Standard asymmetric agency problem. I'm giving you money, I don't know what's going on. You're somewhere, maybe in Africa, maybe in the Caribbean. You're telling me I'm looking after your investment. How do I know? So and we know the problems of agency problems. You don't end up with the first best, not even the second best. Sometimes no contract at all. So if you want that money, if countries want the $100 that the Europeans are trading the carbon themselves, by the way, and they don't get $100. They get $11, $10. And usually the excuse given is that we don't trust your governance. We don't know, there's no transparency in the system. Guess what? We now have the technology to have that transparency, to equalize or to ameliorate the concerns of those with the money. Say, okay, I'm going to use a trust fund because that's a commitment mechanism, or pre-commitment mechanism, such that new governments would not renege on the old governments and say, well, that was the promise of that prime minister, but I'm going to raid the fund and take the money. No, it's governed outside of the usual culprits. And the blockchain would be there to ensure transparency and accountability. Finally, I want to show you how you end up in I'm done, Marianne, just this one. So what happens when you do achieve the equitable and nature positive economy? There are no losers in this economy. Believe it? Yes. You should believe it because it's doable. Imagine in this world, we're talking about a living and thriving nature. So nature wins. The local communities win because when we create resilience in nature, we create resilience in the people. We stabilize them in their land. And they have incentive compatibility because they realize that I am making money, I'm getting employment, I'm getting income from keeping that asset alive and well. So my livelihood and the livelihood of that elephant are intertwined. Who else benefits? Well, you have to always, I worked with governments for 25 years at the IMF. I know all about governments. You have to satisfy the government. So what does the government get? Well, of course, they're going to get the balance on their balance sheet, as I said before. They're going to, their ratings are going to go pretty well. Actually, some countries, it's going to be changed day and night from poverty to like discovering oil way back when. Except that this oil does not pollute. This is a technology that reduces pollution in the atmosphere. Okay, so you're also diversifying the economy because you're moving away from the typical trade to actually diversifying through protecting your environment. And who also benefits? The buyers. The buyers not only getting a carbon, because people always tell me, oh, what are you selling? Carbon? No, no, no. If it's Microsoft, Microsoft gets to say, I'm getting carbon credits. They may choose to use those to offset, or they may choose this to actually sell at a higher price. But whatever that new price that they sell at, all the assets of the country gets repriced at the new price. Everybody benefits. But also Microsoft is going to say, I enhance my ESG score and I hit SDGs 1, 3, 5, 8, 10, 13, 14, 15, and I get to put it on my website. How much is that worth to Microsoft? Surely more than the price of a ton of carbon. And that's why my advice always to people that are setting this up is charge them carbon plus. And use that premium, use the blockchain, Waleed's blockchain, use that trust fund to make sure to assuage the concerns of the investors so they don't worry about what's happening to that money and is it getting to the right people. And more importantly, that the people themselves find themselves in the contract. They are part of the contract. And that's why we end up with the win-win-win model. There are no losers here. Okay? That's why this is the new paradigm. Hopefully this would be the paradigm for tomorrow. Thank you.
Well, this applause definitely should be dedicated to UNITAR, one of our conference partners. They have been key from the very beginning to see how we can actually conceptualize the idea around the conference. So one of the key drivers from UNITAR, Katharina Still, she's not with us today. She had to go on a mission away from Geneva, but I just want to extend our thanks to her as well. I'm sure she will be listening to the recording. So thank you, Katharina, for all your work. She was one of the people that I could call at midnight and she would take the phone. And in that regard, I really would like to thank each one of the partners that you can see here on our banner. I would like to thank the International Labour Organization that has been really important for us being involved. Thank you, Eckhard, for your contribution and bringing as well your colleagues inside to our conversation. Unity already said, thank you so much for all the work that you have been dedicating to the Binational Capital Conference and also the possible next steps that we can discuss. Also a big thank you to UNCDF, already mentioned ASMITA. Thank you for having been a fantastic matchmaker. You brought us in contact with some really brilliant people, game changers, and it was just easy for us to kind of bring together this constellation of experts, and you were instrumental for that. Thank you, Ayase, for your support. Also, big thank you, Adam, again to you and to the key researchers of the Harvard University Economic Department. I hope I said it correctly. It's really fun to work with you, and I'm looking forward to the next days and also what is to come. For those who read the press release correctly and in detail, they read that we are supported by ServiceNow, and I would like to highlight that again at this occasion. Edouard, you have been fantastic. Without your support, we couldn't have done the event as it was now, and we appreciate all the work in the background. We know that you have been advocating and very keen to bring this to the next step, to the next stage, and I'm really, really excited and thankful for that relationship, and we hope that we can deepen that relationship as we are moving forward. Thank you for being with us. Excellent. Yeah, and then we have a couple of other partners. We have the Centre Scientifique de Monaco with Atelier Hilmi. We have the Footprint Coalition with Rachel, Clarity AI with Rodolphe, Rebalance Earth with Walid, and AgAu with Thierry. Where are you? I can see you here. And Takmina. So as you can tell, this is all about relationship and all about working together on the professional but also personal level, because I think we all have in common that we would like to change the narrative that we have observed. We all have the ambition that we can think about economic development in a new paradigm, where we can think about what are the consequences for the workforce, what are the consequences for local communities, what are the consequences actually for our own families and lives. And so we thank you all for your different contributions. I see Ralph. Ralph, you have been a fantastic keynote speaker. You watched my timekeeping signs. And you even improvised when we could not get the presentation up to the screen. So thank you for always being also a nice entertainer. We really appreciate that. But not only entertaining, but really evidence-based. And we always learn a lot when you are sharing your expertise with us. Thank you. So obviously, such a conference can't be done without a lot of people that I haven't mentioned now that are working in the background. And I will start just for the protocol with the core team, which is Leonie Achtnich, Eckhard Ernst, and Jörn Erbgut. The four of us, we are part of the Cham Labs team. And I can reveal that we have been the last months basically working around the clock. So it was like giving the token to the other. So it was like a non-stop office. But I have to say, while I think we can say we're all exhausted, at the same time, it's extremely inspiring and energizing that we have a functioning team that brings things forward. When I see what has been done the last weeks now, it's makes me really satisfied and happy and as well optimistic what can be achieved when you work together. And I want to extend that to all of you, that it pays off when we dedicate our passion and interest for a multi-stakeholder engagement. So I'm speaking here on behalf of being the head of stakeholder engagement. Okay, so, yeah.
I just would like to say a very special thank you to Marianne, even from the core team, because I think in whatever time zone you were living in the past weeks, whenever you would write to Marianne, she would write back in a minute. And I think that says it all. So I think you deserve a special thank you. And I think we all know that we've all been in touch with her.
Thank you, lady. Thank you. Thank you so much. We also have a couple of people I haven't mentioned. We have a couple of volunteers who are still now with us at this time. We have, I'll start with you, Natalia, I see you here. We have Natalia, who helped us with the logistics and the tech side. I see Dougal, who came from the UK, who helped us with note-taking. I see Mimi, who helped us with note-taking as well. And both of them actually have done a brilliant job in researching for our issue paper. If you haven't read it so far, please do so. I see Tanushree. She was a fantastic communications expert, helping us with social media coverage, but also just, out of the blue saying, oh, Marianne, do we need a promo video? I can do that. And then off she went and she just sent me over. That was fantastic. I can see Sophia Ernst, Eckhard's daughter, who jumped in, and it's amazing at your age that you, dived into such a topic and as well contributed to the conference. I see Gabor, who is part of our executive team, who also was not hesitating to do whatever job was needed to help us to make this event a success. And there are a couple of more who were not here in person, but who were actually working backstage online, because as you know, we had the entire conference as well online. Yes, and that was truly a challenge, but I think it was worth that experience. And for the next time, we make it even better because we have learned so much today. And the special thanks, I can see you, teacher, as well. You came all the way from Germany, from the World Diplomatic Institute. Thank you. Thank you. So I hope I didn't forget anyone from the team. Did I? Yes. Well, from the individuals, I hope I didn't forget anyone. And there are actually two partners that I would like to thank now at the end and to make it as well special. First of all, I would like to thank Tobias, who is actually sitting here. Tobias has been listening to our change requests patiently and said, oh yeah, we will find a way to accommodate that. So thank you so much. We know that we cannot take that for granted, and really appreciate that you jumped in and you made everything that was needed to make the event a smooth experience. And we also thank EUTECH from the European Senate. You saw this morning Benedikt, who is their president. They have been, it's an entire team working as well, I think, day and night to help us to provide for you a good experience online, but also to really flesh out what can be achieved when we talk about financial capital in an interesting and compelling way. As I said, we had over 300 registrations. I don't know how many it was at the end of today, but there were a lot, and we take that as a confirmation that we hit the nerve with this topic. Yes, it's very specific, yet it's very technical, but yes, we need to talk about these subjects. And with that, if there's a person I haven't mentioned, and I should have, I apologize deeply. But thank you so much, everyone who participated today, online or on site. We hope that we can stay in touch. Please come tomorrow if you're in Geneva to the networking coffee, and reach out to us online if you can't make it, and join the discussions in the trainings. And for those who are listening online, there are some discounts and promo codes available for special groups. So if you don't have the means to join us, please reach out and we will come back to you. And I promise we try to come back to you later tonight, because before we will have something to eat and relax a little bit. Okay, so I think we can give all ourselves an applause, and then we will take a picture where we are all happily smiling and finishing the day. Thank you so much, and enjoy now the evening.